Hello, my name is Larry Norton, and this home video is coming to you on January the 18th, 2022. I'm 73 years old, and I want to tell you a little historical information about Fresno, California, Fresno gay journalism. Um, I'm going to read. I know it can be boring listening to someone read to you, but this is my way of trying to get out a record of what happened in the 1970s when I lived in Fresno and was part of a gay liberation. And so this reading I'm going to give you is from the Front Runner. It's a gay rights publication from January of 81, and I'm reading from page 11, Memories of an Activist Editor. So let's just get into it. It says, it has now been 2 years in 1981 since I left Fresno and took up residence in Los Angeles. For personal reasons, I have been out of touch with gay organizations, including those in Fresno, but seeing the Front Runner brings back many memories. I'd like to share some of them to indicate just how much I can appreciate your efforts at the Front Runner. My memories are from September 1966 to January 1979, when I lived in Fresno, Clovis, and Sanger as a gay person hungry for a solid community of gays able to live free from fear. I met a man at Fresno State College whom I loved immensely and romantically, but even though by society's norms he was considered a hippie, he would also be considered straight, and thus my love could not be as intensely reciprocated. I needed gay support. Would my Southern Baptist membership and contacts with Christians help me? I think not. In fact, I know their kind of help was saying prayers for me to change that which God had created in me. During that time, it seemed obvious to me that to build a sense of community among such a diverse set of people, gay people that is, it was important to form a newspaper. Prior to about 1970, communication among gays was within cliques in bars, park cruising, and in small parties in private homes. The first written communication that I know of was a newsletter from Metropolitan Community Church, MCC we called it. Among the early leaders of Fresno's MCC were Ray Cook, Joe Brown, Reverend Van Heck, Gary Lewis, and Reverend Steve Cannell. The struggle to buy or rent space to house the church was an incredible horror story in itself. My involvement began in 1972, my second year as a member of MCC. It was a struggle not so much because the newsletter was a church bulletin, but because homophobia in the overall society put up so many barriers. In 1971, the Fresno Bee newspaper printed a series about 5 articles concerning gay people. In 1969 and in 1970, the Fresno State College paper, the Daily Collegian, had a couple of articles. But there had been no steady diet of news for and about gay Fresno people, either in print or on radio or local television. Besides MCC, there was an organization of gays called the Royal Court, Later, it was the Imperial Dove Court. But to my knowledge, they never put out a newspaper. It was a nonprofit organization bringing gays together mostly in an entertainment and social way, not really religious or political. I was not directly involved at first in that group's efforts to form a Fresno Gay Community Center. To my memory, it was the royalty of that court, chosen by a vote of Fresno gays, who started the Fresno Gay Community Center on Belmont Avenue near First Street. Empress Bobby Christian, Emperor Chuck Wadsworth, and his roommate, later to become Empress Darlene, and many others were involved. The center, it seems to me, was a mixture of success and failure, a story I'd be willing to share some other time. Before the center closed in January 1976, I had become involved in helping Chuck put out the FGCC, that's the Fresno Gay Community Center, newsletter called The Grape Press. One of the successes of the center, more so than the Grape Press, was how how do I get rid of that? Now, where was I reading this article? One of the successes of the center, more so than the Great Press, was how it made it possible for Rose Caglia, Richard Newman, and myself, and others to get together as students at California State University, Fresno. We had no easy way of meeting on campus, but the Fresno Gay Community Center provided the place where we decided to start Gay People's Union. At that time, about the only discussion of homosexuality at Fresno State was in snide remarks and dirty jokes. I had, however, taken 2 classes, one on gays and literature taught by Daniel Brown, who under the pen name Daniel Curzon wrote a book about his experiences in Fresno. It was called Life Among the Carnivores. And another class I took was through the Experimental College about homosexuality in America, taught by Pam Larson. I remember the days of trying to study, work, and put out the Gay People's Union newsletter. It was not an easy job to be a student on a limited income, trying to drive all over Fresno, getting information for articles, typing and editing, mimeographing, collating and distributing it, and also trying to get other people involved. Many of the people in the GPU, Gay People's Union, later went on to form a political club. As the campaign against the Briggs Initiative got started, we met at the home of Randy Odom to form the Wildstein Democratic Club, named after Oscar Wilde and Gertrude Stein. Marcia Conant was president, and Wildstein was in the forefront of our successful fight against Prop 6. After I dropped out of college due to financial crunch, I began to spend evenings with a group of people who eventually formed the Fresno Human Rights Coalition. Fine people like Simone Best and Nancy Carrier, Gary Lewis and Marcia Conant, and many others. The group at first tried to organize various minority groups, but the threat of the Briggs anti-gay teacher petition drive, it quickly became the focus. We made efforts to reach out to non-gay groups, but in hindsight, we were not effective in breaking down barriers of homophobia. Masses of Fresno people did not come running out into the open to help the faggots and dykes gain their basic rights as American citizens. I became the vice president of the board of directors in charge of the newsletter. Memories rushed to my mind. I decided we should just call the newsletter The Informer. Not necessarily a name to excite the masses, but it said what the paper was about. We knew we had the support of the so-called closet queens when Don C., last name he didn't want used, collected $250 from some of his closeted friends and to help us out. I have memories of trying to live out the role of the leader on the one hand, and on the other hand, the role of a servant to the community, of trying to reach out to individuals and diverse groups, trying to be objective and journalistic even though I had no journalism training, trying to learn from my mistakes until I could round up volunteers who would put their hearts and energies into the Informer. And we did get volunteers. A partial list of those who stick out in my memory 2 years later includes Dawn C., Toby, Barbara, David M., who roomed with me, and Larry M., and David Bennett, and Randy O., and Michael M., and someone who went by the pen name A.D. Fruit, which stood for A Dried Fruit. Some of the news events we covered in the Informer included the trial of 2 men found guilty of murdering a gay man in the parking lot of a local gay bar, a man I had known and liked very much, a completely innocent victim. We interviewed leaders of the Fresno gay community as well as politicians, including Mayor Ted Wills and his opponent Dan Whitehurst. There were reports of all kinds of gay meetings and drag shows, reprints of political speeches, a report on Frank Val, a Los Angeles activist who walked the length of the state to dramatize opposition to Prop 6 and helped organize the first gay rights rally at the courthouse, the Fresno courthouse. Reviews of books and even restaurants, endless efforts to collect advertising bills, meetings with straight establishments trying to get them to advertise in the Informer, or at least to let us distribute it, a marathon typing sessions to get it to the printers in time. Speaking of printers, you'd have thought it was editing an anti-American paper, the trouble we had finding a printer. There was no lewdness, just information by and for gay people, but the local print shops were afraid to handle it, no matter how much money we offered them. Eventually we found a printer, but he got the jitters after the first run and said no more. Then I found another printer, and the same thing all over again, and this happened one more time after that. It certainly wasn't a very good bar rag. It was too serious, and certainly it was not a porno rag. But the printers were afraid. That's called homophobia. Fresno not only reminds me of gay journalism that I experienced firsthand, but also of being the object of straight journalism. In the fall of 1975, Rose Caglia and Richard Newman and I had put up notices on campus at Fresno State College on their bulletin boards announcing a formation of Gay People's Union, which said, come out, wherever you are. There's got to be more than 8 of us. They did come out to our meetings at the college union, 55 of them at the first session, and over 60 of them at the second one. The Daily Collegian ran a short item about the meetings in October of '75, and then the journalism department paper, called Insight, ran a full-page article about gay lib at Fresno State. Chris Kovic, a beautiful woman, wears that genius now, and I were interviewed, and it seemed as though my entire life story was laid out along with the picture for all to see. From that single article, I became a, quote, celebrity, unquote. I got threatening phone calls, and by the end of the semester, a woman wrote to Insight saying, Larry Norton appears to be the most newsworthy personality on campus recently. The Southern Baptist Church kicked me out because of the Insight article. Then the paper ran another article about the church's action. With everything else going on in my life, I didn't fight it because getting expelled from the church. I just couldn't take on the whole campus, my church, possibly my parents, neighbors, and perhaps future employers. I didn't want to be a member of the hypocritical church, so I let that battle die out. But when I attempted to return to my former job as an eligibility worker for the County Welfare Department in 1977, some of my former coworkers brought up the Insight article. Even though I had 4 years' experience of satisfactory, above average, graded evaluations, and even though I was number one on an exam taken by over 300 applicants, I was denied a job. So I appealed to the Fresno County Civil Service Commission, and that became front page news in the Fresno Bee and the Fresno Guide, as well as on TV. It wasn't enough, it seemed, to have my private sexual interests a matter for the college paper. It was now there for every Fresno citizen to read about. Had I worked for the federal government after 1976, I would have had job protection as a gay man. Had I worked for the state after Governor Brown signed his executive order prohibiting job discrimination against gays, I also might have had a case. But my lawyer told me that it would have been too expensive to pursue the appeal further. And to this day, workers in Fresno City and county government, well, they do have protection these days, okay. But not all workers nationwide have the protection. Even so, the publicity which my appeal generated led to invitations to speak to college classes and on radio and TV programs. The Fresno Bee carried a long series of articles during the Proposition 6 campaign, which mentioned me and others by name, and that also helped get the word out about how dangerous the Briggs Initiative really was. I'm warmly touched to know that Fresno gays are continuing to carry on the struggle for basic human rights. I wish you lots of good luck in the future. So that's my story. Let's end this video recording.